mean, here's what I think we should talk about. We're going to talk about tenancies, although it's not super stimulating, but it's super important. But I think we should talk about the inspections and the dichotomy on the inspections, because I think that in Realtor land, buyers are under tremendous pressure to waive inspections.
But what does that mean legally?
Well, legally what it means is that if you can hear my phone ringing in the background, it's probably somebody calling to tell me their tales of woe, which is that they bought a property, they waived inspections, and now that they've moved in, they've discovered all of these different things that are wrong with the property, and they want to sue the seller, and in some cases they want to sue the agent, although we don't hear that a lot, but every now and then. I'm not suggesting that anybody wants to sue you.
I know.
But I have had people that are just absolutely furious that they were told or advised or encouraged to waive their inspection, and they want to go after the seller and anybody else that thought it was a good idea for them to not do a home inspection, even though we all know that if they had insisted on an inspection, their offer may not well have been accepted.
So you're saying just always insist on an inspection?
Hold on. Well,
I think if you do, you're gonna lose. You're gonna lose out on opportunities to buy real estate.
Oh, so you shouldn't always insist.
Well,
no.
All right. So waiving inspection has to be very impartial. So in my opinion, waiving an inspection has to be impartial. That is not my decision to make. I'm not encouraging you to do it.
Well, what do you
How
say?
bad do you want that house?
What do you mean when you say impartial?
Do I recommend it? Yes, I do.
Okay.
I will go through the house and show you what I see wrong with it, but I'm not a home inspector. And I tell my clients that all the time. I think you have to decide how bad you want that house. Like, I mean, is there already 5 offers that we know there's 5 offers on the table? Is waiving inspection going to be the determining factor of who chooses it? Probably, which is sad, but it's true. There's different ways that you can try to go around it, but the ultimate decision is going to be if they have some offer, one with the home inspection, one without, and they're the same money, they're taking the one that's without. I mean, for a seller, that's just less opportunity for you to fall out of escrow. And that's where they see it. I don't ever encourage my clients to waive an inspection, but some of my clients come in from overseas and they're down to the last week to find a house, and they're just like, I don't even care, Brieyana, just waive it. Like, we'll deal with it after. And yeah, I'm going to do what they want, but I don't necessarily agree with it. I've seen in the more upper market, in the more like $1 million home range, some of these sellers are actually just getting a home inspection done and a septic inspection done before they put it on the market. And I just did one where it was around $1 million, and we had to have a pre-approval and a successful first showing, and then the listing agent would share with us the detailed 82-page home inspection and the septic inspection. So when we're going to do offers, there's really no waiving inspection. There's no liability on the seller. There's no liability on the buyer. There's no liability on the agents involved. There's no liability on the closing attorney. There's no liability on anybody. You got the inspection. Like, you see everything wrong with the house. Now this isn't part of a negotiation tool. It's highest and best money and what you're going to cover for an appraisal gap. There's really no, and I think that that's a very smart thing on everybody involved to do, so that there's no liability at the end of it. I think it would brush off a lot of those cases where your phone's ringing and people are like, oh my God, there's water everywhere, I shouldn't have waived inspection. Well, now they got a home inspection. It's right here.
Right. Well, they could do, a couple of things. They could do an inspection for informational purposes only, right?
Yeah.
So that way they have the information, but they don't really have the leverage to negotiate with the seller. But what I would tell you is that, talk about the predicament that people are in, it's really much worse than people think, because if you are that person that didn't do a home inspection and you have discovered after the closing that you have a home with a lot of different problems, you really don't have recourse. I mean, your recourse is to sue the seller, which involves hiring an attorney who will charge you on an hourly basis. So an attorney with any experience at all will be charging upwards of $200 an hour to chase a seller through the legal system. You can absolutely bet that the seller is going to make a giant issue of the fact that you waived the inspection and you accepted the consequences associated with waiving the inspection. So you don't even really have a good case. I mean, it's like, first of all, you got to pay an attorney by the hour to represent you. that's if you find an attorney that even wants to take that case on, because that case is probably a loser. The only time that you could maybe get around that, that sort of bad fact pattern is if you have willful concealment of defects, where a seller has gone to outlandish lengths to conceal a defect that you wouldn't be able to see on your own, or even an inspector would be able to find, because then we're getting into the category of fraud, and fraud is obviously treated more seriously. The consequences can be a little harsher.
Like hiding something behind a wall.
It could be some different things involved in a fraud case. But your run-of-the-mill garden variety case where somebody elects to waive their home inspection and then makes discoveries after the closing about, the boiler's got, only got a couple of years left and the roof has a leak. Those are not promising cases. So when people call up and they're mad as what and they want to file a lawsuit, I don't really talk them out of it, but I try to alert them to the fact that it's no bed of roses. So maybe an inspection for informational purposes only. But I'm very old school. I mean, my way of looking at it, this is truly just my own personal point of view, is that if you have to waive the inspection to get the house in the first place, and your alternatives are limited, living with a parent, renting in a place that you don't want to rent, so this is what you have to do to buy the home, then I think you accept the consequences, and now it's your house, and if there's a problem with it, it's your house, and you have to
deal with it.
You have to fix it. You have to hire somebody to fix it. This is not fun to spend money or be,
after you just did closing costs.
Doing repairs on your new home, but nevertheless, this is part of home ownership.
It is. It sucks that it would happen right after you closed and you just dished out 12 grand in closing costs, and now you move in and you're out another 6 for God knows what. But in the reality of it, I mean, if you waive home inspection, that is a risk. I tell my clients it's a risk. I mean, if you waive it, that's on you. That's your choice. You're going to have to deal with the consequences that come from it if that happens. And you say, I mean, home inspection for informational purposes only, that only gets you so far too. I mean, if you have someone waiving it and you have someone for informational purposes, I mean, in reality, they're going to take the easiest way out.
And as the inventory becomes more scarce and the market becomes more competitive, I'm always trying to look into the crystal ball to see what's next, but I really do think that we're going to continue to see people waiving inspections, maybe not even doing them for informational purposes only. Here's a fun fact. Well, it's nothing fun about it, but it's a fact. Home inspectors are really hurting right now, right? So do you have a go-to home inspector that you worked with pretty consistently, and have they complained to you that business is off because people aren't doing inspections?
Yes. I have a Massachusetts home inspector that I've been working with since day one, and yeah, he's said that it slowed down a lot for a long time. He has a lot starting to happen. I think we've kind of seen some properties being able to have them, but not a lot. I mean, they're still hurting for business. I think that a lot of another thing in this market that kind of goes hand in hand with the home inspection is appraisal gap coverage. You've seen it. I've seen it. What do you think about it?
Well, I'll be totally honest. I find it very confusing because, and I've seen many transactions where even the parties can't seem to agree on what they agreed to. So, why don't we back up and talk definitions? Why don't you explain what it is and how you use it as a tool to get deals under agreement?
All right. So obviously, when you have a lender, you're going to pay for an appraisal through your lender. They're going to send an appraiser out. The appraiser is going to go and walk through the house, take all the comps in the area, pull it together, and decide what the actual value of this house is and what the bank is willing to lend on it. So if you offer $600,000 for a house, and let's say the bank only said it came in at $580,000 of value, well, the bank isn't going to lend you any more than $580,000 for that house. So what happens to that overvalue than undervalue to me lately? Because I think that all the cash offers and all the crazy offers that happened last year have started to boost the value so much that now houses are just appraising higher at these higher price points than we're listing them for. So that's something I've seen a lot. For a buyer in a seller's market, it's important to consider what an appraisal gap may be for you and what that means. It means that if you're coming in offering $600,000 for a house and your appraisal goes through and the actual value of the house is $580,000, that gap of $20,000 is where the appraisal gap comes in, and who's going to cover that gap? Are you? Is the seller going to lower the price? What are you guys going to do? You can put it in your offer initially and say, I'm going to cover $5K of an appraisal gap, and that's it. So when the appraisal comes back, it comes back at $580,000, you're paying $585,000, and then we're not worrying about the rest of that offer, and we're closing and we're done. But what does that mean for you down the road? I mean, what does that mean for you in 10 years? Is that if some people are covering full appraisal gaps, right? So if they cover a full appraisal gap and we're like 80 grand off, and people are dishing out $80,000 over the appraised value of their house, what is that going to mean for you in 10 years? It's going to mean you're 80 grand out, you paid this so much over for your house, and now your house isn't remotely even worth what you paid for it, you know? I mean, the bank lend you this much, but you even dish out an additional X amount of dollars, and now you're out that cash, but you're also sitting at a loan where the house is probably even lower than the loan now. The tricky thing about the appraisal gap coverage is your appraisal results usually come in, what, like a week, maybe a week and a half before closing?
Well, it depends. Sometimes they order
earlier.
the appraisal rate when the purchase and sales agreement is signed.
True. So sometimes it can be a little bit before, sometimes it can be a little bit after. But I would say probably around between 1 and 2 weeks before closing, you're going to find out what the appraised value is of your house. So if you have that gap coverage in there, you're not going to know if you need to bring that additional amount to closing until about 1 or 2 weeks before you're coming to that closing table. So it's kind of like spinning the roulette table and seeing if the ball's going to land.
I think the appraisal process, I mean, I do think that if you have 10 different appraisals done, I think that you'll find that a lot of them will be bunched up around the same number, because one of the primary barometers of value are comparable sales, which all appraisers are going to typically rely on the same pool of comparable sales. Oh, the place around the corner sold for this. Okay, we'll make a note of that. The place in the next town over, it's not in the same town, but very similar house. The place in this same town sold, but there's some differences. It's smaller, it's bigger. So these appraisers, these licensed appraisers, have become masterful at assimilating all that data. And then, so they have that, and that drives in many ways, that drives the ultimate value, the assessed sort of appraised value of the home. And then, of course, there's an opportunity for some subjective, a subjective component of it. You know, the appraiser's own, because the appraiser's actually in the property, and they're on the property. So it's largely an objective, data-driven process, but it does have subjective elements to it. So I think most appraisers, I think the problem, what we're talking about here, I think the real problem is that you want the appraisal to be a very sober measure of value. So that whether it's a good market or a bad market, obviously in a good market it's going to be worth a little more, in a bad market it's going to be worth a little less, but the bank doesn't want to be totally out of step with what they're lending on the property. So prices right now are rising at such a rapid pace that appraised values are struggling to keep up, and they probably should not keep up, because they're not supposed to be tied in with market conditions that are really supernatural, like these market conditions are, which are being driven, I think, by the pandemic and a housing shortage and a lot of other things.
So what happens is, say this guy's house is appraised at $400,000, right? And then someone buys that house for $500,000 and covers the appraisal gap of the $100,000 in cash, right? So the sale price of that house now is $500,000. So what's happening is then this guy's buying this house for $900,000 when it only appraised at $8,000. So now it's worth $9,000. So now when they're doing the comps the next month, these are worth $9,000. So the appraised value is starting to come up to the $9,000 because that's what the comps are around, but those people covered that difference in cash. So the appraisals are trying to come up and match with the cash offers and the sale prices of the homes.
Yeah.
So it's kind of confusing, but it's like, it's kind of a mess.
Well, the good news too is we're taking all these sort of evasive, we're conducting all these evasive maneuvers, and we're trying to get out in front of a short appraisal, and we're almost overthinking it, but we're definitely thinking about it.
Yeah.
But then what I'm seeing, deal in, deal out, things tend to be appraising. So, I mean, I'm not saying that that properties don't always appraise. There are situations where there have been shortfalls.
Yes.
Rarely are these shortfalls significant, although I've seen it. I'm seeing some properties actually come in over, which is kind of shocking, which makes you wonder what went into the pricing of that property. Or just the appraiser was feeling particularly confident about that property on that given day. But the appraisal shortfalls, thankfully, are uncommon. So more often than not, the property does appraise. The appraiser always has the purchase and sales agreement in front of him or her. So we don't keep that document from them. So they know what this property is being bought, sold for. And when a buyer and seller can come to terms and agree on the price of a property being X, that in and of itself is considered to be a reasonable barometer of value. Yeah. So you could stop there and say, wait a second, if the buyer will pay X and the seller will accept X, then it's worth X. That's what it's worth. But we can't stop there. We have to do an appraisal, and banks do. But they have the purchase and sales agreement, so they know what the parties have agreed to. So they have the benefit of that information. And sometimes they go on that journey and they wind up right back where they started, and they said, you know what, frequently the property, don't you find, just appraises at the sales price? The sales
price, yeah.
So or sales price, right, or sales price plus 5,000. You know, they know a short appraisal is going to be a problem. So you know, I think that there's a lot of sobriety that goes into that decision to basically say, well, the property's not even worth what these people have agreed to buy and sell it for. I think they know that that's going to set off some repercussions. They're going to be questioned about the appraisal. People will question their abilities, like, oh, what was that appraiser thinking? So they know that a short appraisal is going to have repercussions. It's going to send shockwaves throughout the transaction. So I think they do it, you know, only under circumstances where they are absolutely positive the property is not worth what it's being sold for. And they're trying to alert to the bank, don't lend that. Gotcha. So.
Thanks for tuning in, for keeping up with Len and Bree. This was episode 3, and I'm Bree.
I'm Len.
And we'll see you guys soon. Bye.
Thank you for tuning in.